Okay, so I apologise for the PowerPoint as well. It can be hard to explain graphs when you don't have something to point at, so I thought a PowerPoint was the best approach. So I guess the brief we had to come and talk to you today was what does the data tell us from PIAC? And I was kind of reflecting on that and thought that actually most people don't, go on the ABS website and look at the data themselves. So most of the time, when we find out what the data tells us, we find out the media's interpretation of what the data tells us. So I went and had a look at what the media had told us were the results from PIAC, and there was a tremendous amount of media coverage about PIAC, a lot of interest, and if you look at some of the headlines, they were all very uniformly bad news. In fact, catastrophically bad news in some cases. So ABC Radio National told us that half of all adults in Tasmania can't read properly. ABC Local Radio told us that half the country is functionally illiterate. The great bastion of journalism, Today Tonight, told us that 44% of Australians don't have enough reading and writing skills to function effectively day to day. And even The Guardian said it was Australia's national shame. In fact, it seeped into popular culture as well, this data. A colleague of mine a colleague of mine was going for a coffee in Hobart and saw this. And so you can see that the takeaway message that a lot of people have got from PIAC is that there's this very large pool of people out there that either can't read or can't read enough to function properly in today's economy and today's society. But is that really what the data tells us? So obviously that's a leading question, so we'll find out. Jan spoke a bit about PIAC, so I won't go over that again. I should acknowledge that it was funded by the Australian Government Department of Education, as they are now. The key thing is the bottom point, though, that scores are derived on a scale ranging from 0 to 500. So that's the distribution of scores looks something like that. So we've got, how do I get the pointer? Anyway, you can work it out. Zero's down the far left, 500 is up the far right. There's a small proportion of people that are at the top end, and a group of people that are down the bottom end as well. And most people are somewhere in the middle of that big clump. And I think the average was about 274 or something for literacy. But obviously that doesn't really tell you much in terms of, you can't really interpret that and learn anything from it. So what people do is they chunk that up into different levels, and each of those levels is given a name. So that is basically to aid in interpretation of the data. We can compare different groups of people to see how different groups are functioning. And then when you chunk up the data, you get something that looks like that, like Jan showed. If you look at that group, 44% of Australians are below level 3, and that's about 7.4 million people. So when you see those news stories, that's the figure they're quoting. They're equating being below level 3 with functional illiteracy, or being unable to function. And then I thought and Tasmania often gets picked on in terms of the PIAC data. At work, we even got a call from the BBC that was going to do an article on how no one in Tasmania could read properly. We're able to set them straight though, luckily. So in Tasmania, about 49% of adults are below level 3, but you can tell from the graph it's really not really that much worse at all than any of the other states. So South Australia and WA are the next worst performing states, and they've got about 47% of the population below level 3, and I don't think that difference is actually statistically significant. So we should stop picking on Tasmania as the first thing to take away from there. But the fundamental thing is, what does that being below level 3 actually mean? Does that mean that if you're below level 3, are you incapable of functioning? So I had a look at the data to see what that showed. So of people below level 3, so if you believe those interpretations, these people are basically not capable of functioning. But actually they've got quite good employment participation rates. 58% of them are working, and males, 67% of them are working. 11% have a bachelor degree or higher. So we've either got got a lot to worry about a university system, or actually people below level 3 are capable of performing quite well. And if you look at certificate 3 or higher, so a skill vocational qualification like a trade certificate, 38% have at least that. And in fact, 22% of this group that are working are employed in the most highly skilled occupations. So that means they're doctors, or they're lawyers, or they're school teachers, or they're various kinds of managers. And 38% of this group read books at least once a week. So they can actually read, and actually, in fact, 79% of them read newspapers and magazines at least once a week. That group, 9% have wages in the top income bracket. So really, this group actually, obviously, they are capable of functioning well in today's society. So if below level 3 doesn't really mean you're incapable of functioning, what does it actually mean? In PIAC, OECD have actually come out and they've actually specifically addressed this and said that the levels aren't intended to be benchmarks or minimum standards associated with particular things. All they are is they're intended to aid interpretation and understanding of the data. And so what does it mean to be at a level? And that means there's that describes what sort of tasks you're able to typically successfully complete. So this is the difference between what a task at level 2 is and a task at level 3. So don't expect you to read all of that, but basically the gist is that level 2, as Jen showed as well, you still need a reasonable level of literacy skill to be able to successfully complete those tasks. So there might be competing information, you might need to make low-level inferences, you might need to navigate around within a digital text. And then if you look at what is required at a level 3 task, it's basically the same thing but slightly harder. So there's no sort of, the difference is one of degree rather than an absolute difference. So texts will be slightly longer, they'll be more dense, there might be more conflicting information, you might have to disregard other information that is irrelevant, and so on. I think ACER summed up what I was trying to say really well. PIAC is not a measure between the illiterate and illiterate. Rather, it assesses across a continuum of literacy and numeracy, measuring adults' ability to engage with a broad range of tasks typically encountered in the 21st century. So this is the kind of model that is typically how PIAC is interpreted, that there's this dividing line on which one side you're illiterate and on the other side you're literate, and that comes at level 3. But actually, it's not like that at all. And that's how we should think about literacy, that it's a continuum. It goes from poor literacy up to better literacy. So we go back to our headlines again. I'm calling them busted. But that's not to say that literacy skills aren't really critically important. If you look, it just means you have to look sort of more deeply into the data to find the stories. So this is the proportion of people with a bachelor degree. There we go. You can see that there's this strong relationship between your literacy skills and the proportion that have a degree. So in level 4 and 5 literacy, about half of people have a bachelor degree or higher. Down the other end of the spectrum, it's only about 6%. And the same thing is if you're working in a highly skilled occupation, so the doctors and lawyers. In the top level, level 5, we've got about nearly 70% working in one of those jobs, whereas down the other end of the spectrum, it's again only about 5 or 6. Unemployment rate is obviously a key metric. The title of today was what's the economic impact of literacy. And you can see there that there is again this really strong relationship between your likelihood of being unemployed and your literacy skills. Less than 4%, level 4 or 5 literacy. Less than 4% of people at a level 4 or 5 literacy are unemployed, whereas it's close to 10% at the other end. Again, income, same story. People with better literacy skills are much more likely to be in the top income bracket. So the conclusions. The key thing really is that literacy is a continuum, not an absolute. So we're not divided into the literate and illiterate. It's a continuum of poorer or better literacy. And PAC doesn't set a minimum required level of literacy. So if you see one of those stories about 44% of people fail to be functioning today at the level required, that's not actually true. And as those figures earlier demonstrated, being below level 3 doesn't mean you're incapable of functioning. So, but of course, literacy does make a big difference to outcomes. The better your literacy, the better your outcomes. How was your time? About right? Okay. Well, I can leave it there. There's a bit of other stuff that we've been working on that I was going to go to if we had time and might be able to sneak it in. And sorry, the other point I was going to make. I guess, when we're trying to bring the government's attention or the public's attention to a problem, the temptation is to make the problem seem really big and therefore we must act. But I think the other way of looking at that is that if the problem seems too big, people won't act. There's 7.4 million people with literacy below level 3, so it would be very difficult for any policy to make any dent in that. But if you actually look at the very bottom end of the spectrum, below level 1, there's only 600,000, and it would take it wouldn't take as much effort to focus on that group. How to access PAC data? So the best bet is to go to the ABS website. You probably won't be able to find it, but search for PAC or use the catalogue number 4228.0. And if you can actually find the PAC data, there is actually a heap of data there that can be extracted. So there's data by individual states. There's a heap of national data. So that's all on the website. PAC obviously though isn't the only data set that exists about literacy, and so there's all those other data sources. PISA is a similar project to PAC that looks at literacy for 15-year-olds and compares performance of 15-year-olds internationally. PEARLS is a similar thing that Australia participated in for the first time in 2011, I think, which does a quite similar thing for children who are in Year 4. And then, of course, there's NAPLAN, which every child, or pretty close to every child, participates in Years 3, 5, 7 and 9. And that's kind of what I want to show today, some work that we only just released yesterday, in fact, so that's why I'm quite excited about it. Now we've taken NAPLAN data and we could talk all day about the limitations of what NAPLAN does or doesn't measure, and I don't intend to do that, but what we've been able to do is integrate NAPLAN data with census data. So the problem with NAPLAN data is that it doesn't actually contain very much information that helps us understand the student's background characteristics. So one answer would be to collect more data in NAPLAN, but the other way to do it is that actually we've got census data for all those people. We don't need to collect it again. What we can do is we can merge the two data sets together using what's called statistical data integration. And what that means is that, so we've got NAPLAN data which has people's literacy skills, but it doesn't have very much background information. And we've got the census that obviously doesn't have anything about people's literacy, but it does have a wealth of background information. So we can bring those two data sets together. We can use the background information in conjunction with the NAPLAN information. And what you find, which won't come as a surprise to anybody, but there is a strong relationship between socioeconomic status and NAPLAN. So I'll show a couple of, this one I think is one of the most interesting. So we're able to use the census data to look at what your father does for a living in conjunction with your NAPLAN scores. And what we're measuring here is the proportion of people who are below the national minimum standard for reading. And if your father is a school teacher, only a very small proportion of people fall below the national minimum standard. If your father is a truck driver, or a cleaner, or a machine operator, we've got a much larger proportion that are below the national minimum standard for reading. I should point out this data comes from a pilot project we've done with the Tasmanian Department of Education, so it only relates to Tasmanian government school students. But I think it really shows the potential of this sort of work. And I'll finish on this graph, I think. Obviously, NAPLAN doesn't collect anything about income, but by bringing the census data across, we can look at how does household income relate to a child's NAPLAN performance. And in houses where the combined household income is less than $400 a week, about 15% don't meet the national minimum standard for reading. In houses where the combined household income is $2,500 or more, it's only about 4%. So there is a really strong relationship there. So I'll probably leave it there. I'll skip to the end. And there's my contact details if people are interested. So thank you very much.
Okay, so some questions from the floor. Yes, there's a question down here. I think they're recording. I think that's the purpose.
My name's Robin Nutt. I come from an adult literacy background at TAFE for many years. And we were asked by the government to do post-testing of TAFE students for their courses. And what we found with the testing was that there was actually no motivation, there was actually nothing in it for the students at the end of their course when they passed to do that testing to gather that data. So I'm wondering, when I'm looking at your data, some of those high-level people, if I was asked to do an assessment, I suppose, and I was asked to participate in something like that and I was tired, I would give up as well. I'm wondering how much of a factor that has been interwoven into those results, and can you calculate that?
I think, well, it's a fair point. I don't know the data off the top of my head about how many people started the assessment and gave up, but in terms of the people that we had pretty high participation rates in Australia of who participated in it, and I guess that's one of the advantages of ABS doing the survey, is that ABS has powers, which we didn't use in this case, but has powers to compel people to do surveys. And therefore that means that people are very likely to do ABS surveys, which of course makes the data more reliable because it's more representative. So I don't think that a lack of motivation really would have come into it. I don't know, Jan, do you?
That's why we're passing it. The Twitter account is #libraries4literacy. So some people are already Twittering.
And I would have thought that if it applies to Australia, it also applies to other countries too. So I think there has to be the possibility that people say, I'm just not going to do it, or I'm going to give up. But there are anecdotal stories of people taking a lot longer to do it, and you know, having the opportunity just about to give up, but really determined to finish it. So the anecdotal evidence, I think, is that people have been very willing to complete it, to do their best. But I think that there always has to be that question attached to it.
I'm noting some suspicion or some cynicism.
I'm not buying it because I believe that I would flip through it. I know that if I know that some people would try.
But I know that if it was too long and I had something else to do, even though if I had to do it, I would flick through it very quickly and guess.
It's
It may not give up, I guess.
So in support of what you're saying, there was a tweet just a moment ago saying it feels a bit overwhelming for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I suppose that's hard to quantify, really.
Yes. There's a question. Jane is next, and then the person behind her.
So firstly, I want to know if I can't find the PIAC data, does that mean I'm below level 3?
We'll have to make that a test.
Miley's found it for us, so she's just tweeted it. We'll just copy her. My question is, are you going to do that data around father's occupation for other states? State Library of Queensland runs a Dad's Read campaign, and that would really support, we like data and evidence to support the work that we do. And I do know South Australia the Dad's Read campaign has gone national. South Australia is doing it, and I know that Tasmania is about to think about it. So that data would be really important for us. Is that going to happen?
I would really like it to.
Do we pay you to have it done?
You can, yeah. Well, if you've got contacts in the education departments in the various states, then we'd be really glad to talk to them. One of the big barriers actually with that sort of work is that non-government schools don't tend to have the data available. So when we're sort of looking at socioeconomic status, we're only looking at it for government school students, which obviously, you know, is a fairly big part of the puzzle to be missing. But yeah, we'd definitely love to do that pro-analysis on the whole Australia and government and non-government schools. So, absolutely.
Thank you.
Hazel Davidson. I write low-level reading materials for adult immigrants. Jan, when you did your presentation, you showed the age levels and the levels of literacy, and in the highest age level, you said the literacy was lower. As a 70-year-old, I would like to comment on that. When Myles' presentation talked about education levels and literacy, in my generation, very few people went to university, and maybe that has some effect on it as well.
No doubt, I agree completely. Education levels, occupation, reading both in work and out of work, they're all things that actually have changed where your starting point in the decline is. But the other thing that I did say, and I think is really important, is that this is a survey that's telling you broadly about population. It's not saying anything about you or me or anybody else here as an individual. It's just this is likely that this is the case for individuals.
I wasn't taking it personally.
No, I'm pleased to know. But Jane, what I did find amazing was 44 was a very young age to start the drop-off, isn't it?
It is, but that could be due to things like a whole range of things. Like if you think of what are you doing at 44? Well, at 44, I was running my children here, there and everywhere. Did I have time to sit and read anything or to, I would be reading at work and maybe in the train going to work, but that was it. The rest of the time I was taking somebody to basketball, I was picking someone up from a party. I mean, I think that there's life things that come into this as well that you need to take into account.
Thanks, Jen.
Myles, my question is for you. I'm Rowena from Logan City Council Libraries. I think as librarians we're very invested in discovering the link between libraries and literacy. Just wondering with your the merging of data that you did with and the relationship between outbound scores and SES status. Is there any way that you can map where libraries are in terms of those NAPLAN scores? I mean, we could have a low SES community, such as where I work, but we have excellent libraries and some excellent schools. So is there a way that that can be mapped so that we can, have a map of Australia and see, where the hotspots are, where the NAPLAN scores should be low, but, it can possibly be higher than expected?
Yeah, I guess the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is yes if the data was made available and that sort of thing. I mean, at the moment, what we can do is we can look at what schools have, better NAPLAN scores for their socio-educational level, and we can look at, are they associated with good school libraries or good public libraries in that area. I actually also didn't get a chance to show it, but I went and had a look at some of the data that ABS has on who visits libraries, and it's not in conjunction with NAPLAN, but it was actually interesting that it's the more educated people that are visiting libraries more often. I think when you think about it, it shouldn't really surprise, but you kind of it's just an interesting point, I guess.
So technically yes,
Technically,
but there's a whole lot of infrastructural problems around. Sounded like
we can get you maps of where all the libraries are.
Yeah. Robin.
Hi, can you hear me?
No, it's not on, I don't think. Was it?
How is? I'm Robin and I'm from Tasmania.
And she does.
For those people who thought maybe I will, at afternoon tea time, not come back because part of what I wanted to talk to you about is the intersection of Tasmania, PAC, the Alls, and what libraries in the form of Link Tasmania and literacy coordinators are doing about adult literacy. So there might be some questions that we can answer together.
Excellent.
This isn't about libraries specifically, but the PAC also shows that those people with higher literacy skills are much more likely to be involved in the community generally. And I think that's, libraries aren't just about going and reading a book these days, they're about being part of your community. And that relationship between literacy skills and community participation, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Any last questions? Just apropos of that, while we're checking that there aren't any questions, I do a lot of leadership training, and I asked the other day when I was working with some state government employees, who is involved in anything outside of their work? And I was just amazed, and I know how busy people are, but not one person in a group of 30. Yeah, so I mean, that community engagement and putting your hand up and having a go is something I think that we need to really inspire people to be a part of things. Any last questions? It must be cup of tea time, hey? Yeah.
So this is actually a response to Myles and talking about literacy as a continuum, and it is a continuum, but as an educator, I believe in empowering people, and I want people to have the most choice they can have, and in their whole life, in everything that they do. And I know from, as a teacher, as an educator, that the people who have got the lower literacy and numeracy skills are the people who are more at risk of losing their jobs if they've got them, are the people who are less empowered in our society, or often the ones who are less empowered. Not always, but often. And so as an educator, I want us to have everybody to have empowered and to have the broadest range of choices that they can possibly have. So whilst a lot of these people are functioning adequately in life, I don't believe that they actually have the choices that I would like them to have.
On that note, we'll go right to the tea. Would you thank Jan and thank Myles?